The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson, presentation by Reese Love. The hook that I wrote was, "It was so easy to disappear and then to forget." And I think this hook captures the dark side of the novel. While the 1893 Chicago World's Fair was very appealing to many and showed more the fun side of the Gilded Age, a darker side was unfolded in the book as well. This hook highlights how well evil can hide in plain sight and how quickly people can be distracted and just look away from it. The setting and structure of the novel it was set in the Gilded Age, so the 1890s in Chicago, in a major city that was undergoing rapid growth but also corruption and debt. But the structure of the novel is it's separated into two different storylines. One is Daniel Burnham, who is the brains behind the fair. He works tirelessly under pressure and pulls off the creation of the White City in a very short amount of time. While he's very insecure that he got rejected from Harvard and Yale, he never gave up as a businessman and an artist and became one of the most famous architects in America. And then the other storyline is H.H. Holmes, who comes off as a very charming and nice man, but he's really a serial murderer who builds the World's Fair Hotel just blocks away from the fair. He's a sociopath and doesn't feel empathy for really anybody, and his only goal in life, or in the book, is to revel in power and possession, which he does by manipulating people in the fair, mainly young women, and has no remorse for it. And Larson alternates between these two people throughout the novel, which can make it a little confusing, but he does this mainly to build suspense, and it shows just the two different sides of the book and how quickly it goes back and forth, but you can just see the good and the bad are so close to each other and no one even realizes it, and they coexist. Larson makes the good and the bad coexist so well in the novel. A short summary of the novel was that the book tells two true stories from 1890s Chicago, and one, as I said, follows Daniel Burnham, who overcomes big challenges to build the amazing 1893 World's Fair, also called the White City, and the other is H.H. Holmes, a serial killer who uses the fair that Daniel made to lure victims into his hotel and manipulate them and murder them. And he made this hotel that was secretly just designed for murder. And while the fair shows the best of America, Holmes represents the dark side, and his manipulation really brings out his true colors. So, Burnham was one of the most impressive architects in this time period, and he was the brain behind the whole fair, and even though throughout school he was a little unsuccessful and he kind of owns up to it but still isn't very proud of it, he didn't really care what anyone else said about him and became one of the best architects in America, maybe arguably in the whole world. And he kind of symbolizes intelligence and sets the stage for future constructors and kind of forms a great example. H.H. Holmes, on the other side, shows the dark side of the novel, and when he narrates, it kind of becomes obvious. I mean, you can definitely tell when they switch narratives, but he definitely used the fair to his advantage and purposely built the hotel just blocks away, built his hotel blocks away, so it would attract everybody going to the fair, because if they're visiting the fair, they're like, oh, well, the hotel's attached to it, or blocks away, like, we might as well just stay at the hotel too, and that's kind of how he reels in all of his victims. And Larson does a really good job of revealing how Holmes appears charming and nice and uses his good looks to his advantage, but kind of as the novel goes on, you can really tell that he's not a good person at all, and he just wants to lure people in and then commits these awful crimes, and no one really noticed it for a long time. So the three major themes that I kind of picked out in this book was the duality of progress, which is the book reminds us that even during times of great achievement, darkness can exist unnoticed alongside brilliance. So that kind of means, like, while Burnham kind of created this big fair and everyone was having so much fun, and he did this in such a short amount of time and everyone was like, wow, we have to go. Holmes uses it to his advantage and manipulates so many people, and sadly, mainly younger people. And so Larson does a really good job of kind of flipping back and forth through the two narratives and showing how it can, like, flip-flop so easily, how good and bad can. The second one was perception versus reality, which, while Holmes kind of appears successful and trustworthy, Burnham was constantly doubted despite his true genius. This contrast challenges how we judge characters and ambition. So it's kind of, when the book reveals that Burnham got rejected from Harvard and Yale, it definitely doesn't stop him. So I think in Holmes, as he appeals as very nice and trustworthy, you can't really judge people based on their first impression, and the author makes that very clear in this novel. Then the last theme was the fragility of memory, which is, in an era before modern communication, people vanished easily. The book raises unsettling questions about how quickly the world forgets. So without technology in the world, communication, it was a lot harder to communicate with people and get in touch with people, so people would just forget about all this stuff because there's no phones or computers or social media or anything. The personal connection I made from this was In Cold Blood, because they're both nonfiction books that focus on true crime, and I know there's a lot of other true crime books, but this one really compares with Holmes and how psychotic he was and how he committed these crimes as to how it does with the characters in Cold Blood. TV shows it relates to is Stranger Things, and it shows how strange and terrifying things can be just hidden and unnoticed in our everyday lives, and how people can be so clueless with the horror that's happening around them. And another show I related it to was You, which is about a stalker. And the character, like Joe, I thought related a lot to Holmes, and their personalities were very similar in how they both used their looks, and their first impression was really good with people, but then so they get to know a lot of people, but then they use that to their advantage to manipulate other people and turn into really bad people. My academic response was, yes, I did think this was definitely a more challenging book to read. The vocabulary is very advanced, and there was a lot of historic details, especially about architecture and the city planning, that can't be dense at times. Also, because the story switches back and forth between two different plot lines, Burnham and Holmes, it takes some concentration to follow along and keep the timeline straight. You can usually tell when which is talking, but sometimes it got a little confusing, so I'd have to go back and kind of double check. My final thoughts were, about the author's writing, though. What made the book so interesting was that Erik Larson's style, even though it was nonfiction, it read much like a novel. He takes these real events and brings them to life with suspense and emotion and lots of detail. And a couple things that stood out to me were he switches between the light of Burnham's story and then the darkness of Holmes, which keeps the tone shifting in the book very suspenseful. And he uses a lot of foreshadowing really well, often hinting at things before they happen and then later figuring out what those kind of Easter eggs or hidden things meant, which really made me want to keep reading. His descriptions are really vivid, and it feels like you're actually there in 1893 Chicago, experiencing both excitement of the fair and the scariness of what's happening nearby. So even though it was a harder read than most books, Larson's storytelling made it really worth the effort. And then some people that I would recommend this book to would be, if you like a lot of history, you will love the deep dive into the 1893 World's Fair and the major players involved in its creation and construction. And then if you like true crime, you'll be fascinated by the real-life serial killers and the dark side of human nature, and Holmes' story will keep you very hooked into the book. And then another is, if you like well-written nonfiction, you'll really like this book because Larson does an amazing job of making historical events feel like a suspenseful story, because we all know sometimes when history is related, it can get a little boring. So if you're not a fan of nonfiction or history, then it's not really worth picking it up. But my final thoughts were that I really enjoyed this book, and the way Larson weaves the story of the World's Fair with Holmes' dark and criminal acts makes for a compelling read. It's crazy how much history is hidden beneath the surface, and this book does an amazing job of bringing that out. It kept me thinking long after I finished reading. Whether you love history, true crime, or just a good story, this book is definitely worth checking out.